Say Gwen Stacy to any casual fan and the image they'll conjure up is this. She's got this cool punk alt vibe, made bank by guest appearing in the Spider-Verse, Miles Morales movies, and is like the ultimate hottie for e-girl living teenage boys. Like legit, if I was a teenager when the first Spider-Verse movie came out, I would have lost my web fluid over Spider-Gwen, so I can't blame them. She's exactly my younger self's type. But the OG Gwen was something completely different and, I'm not afraid to say, not nearly as interesting. So let's have a look at the antithesis of today's Gwen Stacy, the real Gwen Stacy. Pete first met Gwen in Amazing Spider-Man 31. Because it's Pete, the original and first few subsequent meetings are all a little bit rocky, but eventually the two start a relationship. You've got to remember, at the time, relationships weren't really shown in the same way. Let's backtrack and look at Betty Brant, Pete's first love interest. You can read the first 30 issues of Amazing Spider-Man and not even realise they're dating. It's very much a read between the lines thing. Hell, you don't even see them hold hands. But times change. Comics were slowly starting to open up and Pete moved on from Betty. At college, he meets Gwen. Gwen's a hottie, but also interested in academia and obviously smart, but has a bit of a chip on his shoulder when it comes to Pete. Because Pete's secretly Spider-Man and he F's up his life so bad that he doesn't pay attention to her in the way that society demands of a hot blonde. I will say though, there are signs of Gwen being more mature than her classmates and showing actual efforts to get to know Pete. But hey, Spider-Man. You could also tell that she got hit by the old Peternator early on. She was subtly crushing on him even if she wouldn't admit it to herself. She consistently thought bubbles that there must be more to him. The two would later enter into a relationship and Gwen's character, well, she was given more character development than Betty, but still she was a bit of a plain Jane. And that's not so much an attack on her character, more of the writing style for love interests at the time. There were a few sparks however. Gwen showed a lot more courage, understanding and support in her role alongside Pete. She had a fleshed out world. Her father was a police captain, which starts merely as a tool and plot device, but one that gets worked effectively, and there's a bit more interaction with other side characters, giving her a bit of space and time for her character to build, but mostly she falls into the cliche love interest role at the time. Her main goal is simply to create drama for and on behalf of the main character. So why is she so popular today? Okay, spoiler, here's a take, and I don't think it's a hot one. If Gwen Stacy hadn't died, she wouldn't have ever been a thing. Ask any comic book nerd to think of the biggest Gwen Stacy storyline. 99.9% of them will say her death at the hands of the Green Goblin. The other 0.1% will lie and say the second thing they thought of just to be different and say the death of her father, Captain Stacy. If Gwen had just been another girlfriend that moved away after college and got sick of Pete running away whenever Spider-Man turned up, she wouldn't be on our radar. But because she dies, there's a massive, and I mean massive hangover for us in our own world and for our kid Pete, but also for Mary Jane. Though I will say one thing, it has been handled pretty well, as have a lot of Pete's old flames. Seriously, any scene where MJ and Felicia catch up and make Pete feel awkward, mwah, chef's kiss. So, for those who don't know, Peter started college, met Gwen, and around this time, after so many attempts at setting them up, finally met the ladies next door's niece, Mary Jane Watson. But by this time, Gwen had already been heralded as a love interest, and Pete was too nice of a guy to be entangled in a love triangle for too long, so MJ became part of his surrounding cast, and though there was a bit of competitiveness as she vied for Pete's attention, she hung out with Gwen, was flirty and fun, arguably overshadowing Gwen and stealing scenes at a number of times. I think a lot of the love for MJ comes from this era. Despite ending up as a supermodel, she was this cool chick you wanted to hang out with, but more importantly to this segment, she was there. She was there when Pete and Gwen were dating and were the couple, totally in love and were on the path for foreverness. And that's the major difference. She saw them together. Pete's other girls, even the Black Cat, don't know that relationship. They weren't there. So for MJ, this is always a lingering doubt. Did I only get Pete? Am I only a backup because Gwen Stacy died? And the answer is obviously no, but we know that the human mind works and doubts creep in. But as I said, this has been addressed and handled a number of times quite well by Marvel. If you get the chance, there's a limited series called Spider-Man Blue, which kind of wraps up the whole death of Gwen Stacy in a nice way. But that was it. Gwen was done and dusted. Never were we to hear from her again. With MJ around, she wasn't important enough to bring back from the dead, and I'm sure there really isn't another way or reason to bring her back. Except there was. No, don't go. I swear we won't be recapping the 90s clone saga. Okay, you still here? Good. So, quick history lesson. Gwen and Pete had a uni lecturer called Miles Warren, and it's Spider-Man, so of course he's evil. He creates an evil persona, the Jackal, and undertakes cloning experiments on Gwen and Peter's DNA because he's madly in love with Gwen, who had already died by this stage. The whole thing runs a few issues, gets sorted out, and for 2 decades, it was a once-off story. But the Jackal would return, and oh boy, we'll skip the whole storyline, but let's just say he still had a thing for Gwen, some leftover DNA, because he was cloning her like there was no tomorrow, which, for many of the clones, there wasn't. Now, I was a teenage boy, maybe even pre-teen when these issues came out, so I can tell you, when a Gwen Stacy clone finally emerged from a pod, oh boy, this was before the internet was a thing, and I can tell you, I totally had a Gwen Stacy bug long before you did. Let's just leave this here for a moment, shall we? Alright, I'm done. So long story short, Gwen, or Gwens, came back into the fold and was suddenly a thing again. Nothing special, but she was back on the radar. Look, I was going to write something here about there still probably is an alive clone floating about, but it's such a convoluted mess that it's kind of raised its head again with the latest Gwen pool. Like, life will find a way, and so will Gwen. Cut to the rumblings of the Spider-Verse. Yeah, you've seen the movies, but let's look where it all started. 616 Spider-Man, I have to say that because for the Spider-Verse conversation, people get confused, fought this guy called Morlun, defeated him, then the publishers were like, let's bring him back and make bank. So this Morlun guy is now hunting spider totems across the multiverse. What this essentially does, it gives the comic book publishers a chance to make up a whole heap of fun new characters, but more importantly, sell issues to make more money because it's a crossover event. And God forbid you don't understand the full story without buying every issue. But one of these alternative words was one where Gwen Stacy got spider powers, and in which Peter Parker died, this time at the hands of Gwen herself after Peter turned himself into the Lizard. Now, I'm not sure if Marvel had any big plans going into the Spider-Verse for Spider-Gwen, but they obviously saw an opportunity and ran with it. See, the thing about Spider-Gwen was, it worked. She wasn't the only one. A few other spiders got limited series, but this Gwen was super cool with an alternative, punkish, modern e-girl look, and that was just her Gwen form. But her spider form would eventually look equally cool with a kind of hooded approach. Plus, she was hot. Teenage boys now have the internet, and the fandom will 34. What the fandom will 34? I should probably go Google that, purely educational purposes of course, but her looks weren't just attracting the boys. Her cool design had the girls wanting to cosplay her. But more important, her limited series resonated with the readers. The spin on the classic Spider-Man tales, Peter Parker dying, and some of her bad guys being heroes like Matt Murdock and Susan Storm. It was a good read, and of course she appeared in the Spider-Verse movie, which really shot her to fame, and the rest is history. So Spider-Gwen is an insanely cool character. She deserves to shine, but to be honest, the original Gwen pales in comparison to her, and to tell the truth, despite the reputation, was a boring and underwhelming character outside her support of Pete. But as I said, it's not really her fault. See, at the time of writing, comics were for the boys. Back then, not much attention was made to fleshing out female characters, but reading between the panel, she's the complete package. So how do we hypothesize what Gwen was meant to be like, or could have been given enough time and space and more modern writing? Well, look no further than the original Ultimate Spider-Man run. She's smart, This time both intellectually and streetwise. She's chic, she's tough and extremely independent. I think this is a Gwen that the 616 implied her to have been, but never really had the platform or execution to provide it. So yeah, OG Gwen may not be the person modern day masses expect her to be, but I think maybe she was more than she was as well, if that makes sense. So this was just kind of a random video I just thought up and threw together at the top of my head because I've just started videos recapping the original Gwen era of Spider-Man at the moment. So if you're keen to check that out, head to the Spidey playlist, which should magically appear, I don't know, somewhere above my head. To be honest, I probably will forget to add it, so this video is probably ending with me blankly staring at you. Look into my eyes. Now bark like a dog.